Alright, this week we're going to be working on one of our Securitrons. This one we'll be doing up as the Mark 1 version. So this would be more like the COP, or the versions that haven't received the upgrade from the chip that Mr. House wants you to retrieve. So the doors to the missile launchers are closed and they only have access to their arm guns. I don't have the monitor slotted because we're going to paint that separately. So we're just going to focus to begin with on the blue that is the base chassis. I'm working off of the concept art because it has some very good, basically a new quote-unquote model with how it looks. So we're just going to go in and do blue in the primary spots. For this, I'm going to go ahead and use a Imperial blue. So we're just doing some basic standard painting techniques. No contrast paints this time. We've used rattle can primer, so I haven't even used the airbrush on this. Base black, and then with just some white used for zenithal highlights. And when we apply our paint thin enough, that'll allow the kind of shading to work with just a couple coats of the blue. So we're just going to take our paint, and first we're going to see how it flows. And you can see it doesn't flow a lot. What we want is the consistency of kind of like skim milk to get some nice thin layers. So I'm just adding a couple dabs of water. Mix that in, and you can see it's flowing a lot better there. So it might be a little thick. And the entire reason that you thin your paints is so that as you're painting it on, you don't have to worry about brush strokes being left behind. And it just comes out with a smoother look. So we're going to go ahead and just start, like I said, applying it wherever the blue is indicated in the information I have. The easiest place to start is kind of in the back here. Alright, so we've got our basic coloring blocked in. So we're going to go ahead and let this dry and then move on to the metallics. And once we're done with that, we'll go into doing a bit of work on the tire and the rubbery part of the arms. So our Securitron has dried nicely, so now it's time to move on to finishing up our additional colors here. So first up, we're going to go ahead and do a darker metallic. So I'm going with Vallejo's Gunmetal Gray. So this is still a metallic, but much darker. And I'm using this for kind of the more heavy-duty metal pieces as opposed to the trim. So those would be like the connection sections between the arms and the body and the hands, quote-unquote. The bottom section that links into the roller and the vent on the back. Now, as we can see, metallic is pretty thick. I'm not going to make it the consistency that we've been using for regular paints. Metallic paints need to be a bit thicker because they basically have flakes in suspension to get the metallic look, and if you dilute it too much, you have problems with the overall appearance. So that looks good. Let's get into here. Alright, so that's the darker metal sections done. So most of the rest of this gray is either going to become black or a brighter silver. So I'm going to use the only bright silver I have at the moment, which is Runefang Still from GW. I've had some problems with the consistency of this particular bottle, but I think it's been worked out now. So let's see how this goes on. So that's our silver done. You can see that really picks up those highlights quite nicely. So next we're going to go ahead and turn that gray to black. You can do it with a Nuln oil if your starting point is dark enough. But with this, my starting point is not quite dark enough. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and use contrast black to get that nice deep shading. This is an older contrast black that I have though, so it's too thick. So I'm just going to water it down 1:1 with some medium. And this kind of shows you don't have to use contrast for everything, but it makes a nice item in your toolbox in order to fill slightly different roles. So don't be afraid to mix and match using it. Alright, so that black really pulled those parts together. I've also used it to kind of make a hole through the antenna on the top. You could take a pin vise drill and just drill it out, but it's so small, you're much more likely to just snap it. So just using a bit of paint for the simulation works good for me. So what I'm going to do now is apply a couple details. So we've got like the almost like bank of switches or lights at the top. So we're going to go ahead and apply some white, some Wraithbone base to it so that we can pick those out with some nice bright contrast colors. Alright, so with that done, we're going to let it dry a little bit and just move on to doing the base. And we're just going to do our Towel Light Ochre, which works especially good for the desert. Alright, so Towelite Ochre is down, and we can go ahead and apply our colors. I'm going with some bright colors. I'm not using any blues on these switches, simply because I don't want to contrast with the amount of blue we've already used. I want this to kind of stand out. So I'm just going to go in and apply our red first. Now, as for the rest of the base, we're going to do I'm going to do gray on the stonework around the back and a couple of stones, and we're going to do our green on here. And actually, does it have a flower on top? Yes, it does. So what we're going to do is pop that flower with a bit of yellow first. So that gives our flower a nice bit of color. And then we're going to take our green and do the rest of the body. Since we haven't done a plain white over this, it should pick up on the shading nicely. So I don't think we need to go with a darker green for now. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and do our gray as well. We're just try and capture all of this. There we go. And obviously water this down. Alright, so while the base dries, we're going to go ahead and move on to some weathering. If we wanted this to be a pristine model, just coming out of the dam, for instance, then we would leave it as is, but we want this to have been on the strip for a bit. So we're going to want to, apply a bit of weathering, not a super amount. So we're going to use Agrax Earthshade to apply a wash over pretty much the whole model, just to kind of give it some dingier look. Alright, so let's tone down the brightness a lot on that, just where we want it to. So we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to apply a couple more weathering points to it. While it's drying, we're going to go ahead and move on and start working on our screens here. Now, one thing is you can see where the cutoff point is right up there. So what I'm going to do is take a file and kind of work that joint a bit in so that I can just base this entire row together. So we're going to remove any of the excess flashing that are around these real quick. Yeah, just mostly at this point there. That guy had a bit of dirt on it, which was probably a bit of mold release actually, that didn't come off in cleaning. So hopefully we won't have any trouble with that. And then I'm just going to take a file and kind of work that little joint there. Just to make sure that when we prime these and then snip them off, the part that we snip we don't lose any paint on. I know it'll be recessed, but I just want to be 100% sure. I'm just going to take my GW holders here, and it will actually slot right like that, so the pincer will hold it, and then I just have to hit it with some primer and we're good to go. Okay, so we've got this primed and ready to go. I'm just going to go with the smiley face. You could, as was mentioned on the comments on my unboxing video for these, magnetize these. But if you look at how the slope is, you'll have to magnetize at the very top. So you just have to be careful. You don't want to magnetize in the middle or further to the bottom, because you would have a much greater chance of running through. And with my magnets that I have right now, they would almost certainly puncture through this. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the one face for now. And I'm just going to pick out the face in black. And I am not diluting this because I don't want it running all over the place. So you can see how simple that was. With it being raised, you just have to very carefully brush over the raised section. That way you don't pull anything down. Now I'm going to go ahead and trim this off this way first. And then I'm going to take and just get that tab off there. Now we can kind of come in, clean this up a bit. So we want it sitting nice and flush. And then we're just going to test fit. So just kind of, or just drop everything everywhere. Alright, so that looks good. And what we will do is just take a dab of glue. And this is my preferred, this gel control stuff. It has a nice applicator. I don't waste any of it. If anyone's dealt with the more liquid like Zap-A-Gap or any of the CA glues, it's very easy to, A, it runs everywhere, it gets everywhere, and B, you wind up not using a good chunk of it because it just gets wasted. Your bottles seal up and can't be used. Your tubes get kinked, all kinds of problems. I may pay a bit more for that because of the bottling and everything, but in the long run, I find it worthwhile. All right, so I like the brightness of the face like that, standing out from the rest of the model. So I'm not going to like weather it or do anything like that. I want it to pop and show up like that. Now, we're going to go ahead and apply more Agrax Earthshade, this time to the base. And this time I'm using my gloss stuff because, once again, I'm trying to get rid of it. And it doesn't really matter going over the base. Alright, so we can see that's picked out the detail nicely, and while that's drying, we're going to apply a bit more weathering to the unit itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our shiny metal and our dry brush here, and we're just going to kind of run it along some of the edges to simulate some paint wear. We're not going super crazy over this. This isn't a beat up model, but it is one that's been in service. So we want it to look used, but we don't want to look destroyed. So I'm going to pay special attention to, edges. Now also what we're going to do is a bit of dry brush on the wheels using our dirt. Alright, so we can call that done at this point. So we're just going to wait for the base to dry up some, and then take her in for sealing. Then we'll come back with some tufts like we usually do. Okay, so we are all sealed. Unfortunately, I was out of my regular matte sealer, and the satin I had was too shiny. So then I tried a different company's matte, and 3 coats of it still hasn't brought anything down. So at some point I may hit this again, but for now we're calling it done. Everything, like you can tell it's just too shiny, so that's not acceptable. So I'll wind up hitting it again once I go out and pick up some more. Now, as for tufts, we'll go ahead and apply some, just because I can hit the body of the model without hitting them fairly accurately, and I want to call this particular project done at this point. So we're just going to take some look, because we have a whopping 50mm base to work with. We can take some larger tufts and just get these on. And let's get the smaller one on the side here. Okay, so yep, I'm going to call this done for now. So next week we'll return with some super mutants from the newer boxes. And we'll talk to everyone later.